The Bible gives many examples of government controlling societies, and it gives the reasons for that move from freedom to slavery. Yes, I said slavery. When someone or something controls our decisions, we're no longer free, we're slaves. They could be addictions, controlling spouses, our own fears, or even governments. You see, God did not intend mankind to be a slave to anyone or anything. He created mankind to have free choice, free will. His desire was man would love and serve him because they wanted to walk with God. He did not create robots. He does not force himself on us. Yes, sometimes he will bring difficulties and hardship in order to try and turn our hearts to him. But the ultimate decision is ours. There's a story in the Bible about Joseph, a man who God ordained his steps in order to allow that man to go from freedom to slavery to prison, and ultimately ended up taking Egypt from being a free society to slaves of the government. Genesis chapter 47, verses 13 through 26. Meanwhile, the famine became so severe that all the food was used up. The people were starving throughout the land of Egypt and Canaan. By selling grain to the people, Joseph eventually collected all the money in Egypt, Canaan, and he put the money into Pharaoh's treasury. When the people of Egypt and Canaan ran out of money, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Our money is gone. Please give us food or we will die before your very eyes." And Joseph replied, "Since your money is gone, bring me your livestock, and I'll give you food in exchange for your livestock." So they brought their livestock to Joseph in exchange for food. In exchange for their horses, flocks of sheep, goats, herds of cattle, and donkeys, Joseph provided them with food for another year. But that year ended, and next year they came again and said, "We can't hide the truth from you, my lord. Our money's gone, and all our livestock and cattle are already yours. We have nothing left to give but our bodies and our land. Why should we die before your very eyes? Buy us and our land in exchange for food. We offer our land and ourselves as slaves for Pharaoh. Just give us grain so we may live and not die, and so the land does not become empty and desolate." So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. All the Egyptians sold him their fields because the famine was so severe, and soon all the land belonged to Pharaoh. As for the people, he made them all slaves, from one end of Egypt to the other. The only land he did not buy was the land belonging to the priests. They received an allotment of food directly from Pharaoh, so they didn't need to sell their land. Then Joseph said to the people, "Look, today I have bought you and your land for Pharaoh. I will provide you with seed so you can plant the fields. Then, when you harvest it, 1/5 of your crop will belong to Pharaoh. You may keep the remaining 4/5 as seed for your fields and as food for you and your households and your little ones." "You have saved our lives," they exclaimed. "May it please you, my lord, to let us be Pharaoh's servants." Joseph then issued a decree, still in effect in the land of Egypt, that Pharaoh should receive 1/5 of all the crops grown in his land. Only the land belonging to the priest was not given to Pharaoh. You see, it's a natural human reaction to survive. Everything, man and animals, they strive to live. Most people also attempt to live with little conflict or pain. The human body will strive to use the least amount of energy possible. It's a scientific fact. Americans have been blessed to have a government established by men who understood the pain involved while living under controlling governments. freedom to worship God was not part of an existence under King George. Freedom in general was not part of life then. Government control ruled the lives of everyone. Our founding fathers fought and died to ensure a new country where freedom to worship was a fundamental right. As a result, we do not suffer atrocities like many of the countries around the world. When God is at the forefront, blessings flow like a gently flowing, non-stop river. The good life reigns and peace and prosperity rule the landscape. Other nations do not practice that freedom, many of them, and even in the 21st century, untold Christians are martyred at the hands of ungodly people every day in other countries. China is at the forefront of this. You see, America's been protected from this pain because of the Constitution put in place over 200 years ago. Unfortunately, many do not understand our freedom and are relinquishing many of our rights bestowed by our founders. Dependence on government has become a growing trend in America for decades. When we rely on others to feed and clothe and house us, we relinquish our freedom and become willful slaves to whatever supports us. The story of Joseph is classic for an explanation of what happens when people willfully give up freedom for government dependency. God warned Pharaoh in a dream of the coming prosperity and the severe famine to follow. And while in prison for a crime Joseph did not commit, he was called on to interpret the dreams for Pharaoh. As a result of his interpretation, Pharaoh made Joseph a cabinet member in the administration. Joseph went from criminal to one of the leaders of a country. He then set up the process where Egypt would prepare for the upcoming famine. He ordered the government to start collecting 1/5 of all the harvest for 7 years to prepare for the 7 years of famine to come. The 7 years of abundance was so great they could not even keep accurate records of the incoming grain. After the 7 years of abundance, famine hit the land hard. Joseph had prepared for the coming storm, and when the people started to complain about not having any food, Joseph started selling the grain to the people from the storehouses. The people were satisfied because they had grain. The problem came when they no longer had enough money to purchase more grain. Like any government, when the chance to enslave the masses occurs, power-hungry people pounce. Egypt did just that. Joseph started trading grain for land, and the people agreed because they knew that they'd die if they didn't comply. Genesis chapter 47, verse 19 says, "Why should we perish before your eyes? We and all our land as well. Buy us and our land in exchange for food. And we with our land will be in bondage to Pharaoh. Give us seed so that we may live and not die, and that the land may not become desolate." You see, the people had not prepared for the coming storm on a personal level, but relied on the government instead. When the time came, which it always will, government dependence leads to slavery. The people agreed to give up their lives and land to survive. Joseph had good intentions when he made a plan to prepare for the storm, but human nature prevailed and Egypt became under complete control of the government. Genesis chapter 27, verses 20 through 22. So Joseph bought all the land in Egypt for Pharaoh. The Egyptians, one and all, sold their fields because the famine was too severe for them. The land became Pharaoh's, and Joseph reduced the people to servitude from one end of Egypt to the other. Government is run by men. When power to control others is bestowed on men, they can find it difficult not to abuse that power. We've seen a steady decline in freedom in America. In many cases, it's been done with good intentions, but the end result always seems to be the same. Dependence on government in America has become higher over the last 100 years than any time in the previous history of America. Franklin Roosevelt mimicked Pharaoh when he started the New Deal during the Great Depression. Without doubt, the Great Depression was a horrible time. President Roosevelt and his administration made plans to help the American people recover through governmental relief, recovery, and reform by passing laws they thought would lead to prosperity and reform. These policies transferred freedom and responsibility from the individual to government. This maneuver created a political safety net, causing the electorate to vote for the Democrat Party based on government controlling the majority of ideas for much of the future of America. The American people decided government can control daily living better than they could. Voting became a process where those promising more stuff won elections. If a political candidate could convince the electorate of an easier life with more government control, they prospered in the political landscape. The Democrat Party became the dominant political party from 1937 to 1963. This included the presidency for 7 out of 9 elections. Today, the mindset of government making life easier has almost taken control of the voter base. In the 2012 presidential election, and you'll remember Mitt Romney found himself in a big controversy when he made a comment during a private fundraiser. He said 47% of the voter base was out of reach because of their dependence on government. The sad fact was, even though it was true, as far as that statement, it became a political anchor, pulling his campaign into the sea of political quicksand. The media made him out as a heartless man, and those 47% were offended by the public display of truth. The desire to live comfortably has become dependence on government instead of trusting God, personally working hard and planning for a future. Even Christians fall into this trap. Working hard fatigues us. When an easier way comes along, we find ourselves drawn into the trap. The Egyptians did not store enough grain for themselves, but depended on government for the coming hard times. When the famine came, they looked to government. When hard times come in America, we increasingly find ourselves looking to government for help. Long-term unemployment payments, food stamps, WIC. These are only a few government programs that can lead to long-term dependence. Social Security has become retirement for millions. Instead of planning for our own retirement, we've decided to rely on a government program. With government taking money from the Social Security Trust Fund on a regular basis to pay other bills, it can't draw the needed interest to sustain the fund. It will eventually run out of money. The baby boomer generation draws from the fund faster than the new generations can put it back. In addition, this current generation, and maybe a little bit before the current one, has learned to draw Social Security disability at an alarming rate, creating more strain on an already damaged fund. What happens when the government can't deliver on promises of sustaining the population? Well, then the government starts nationalizing things. This means they confiscate private businesses and property to have money to continue providing for the masses. Eventually, like Egypt, the government controls everything and freedom has vanished. This is historically undeniable. When the government takes control, leaders emerge with personal biases, and before long, God is replaced with immoral behavior, and Christ becomes a liability. He is then forced out of society. A tyrannical government will emerge, and Christians will suffer the most. This is why it is crucial to fight the temptation to relax and depend on others. When we are slaves, we lose the right to worship and serve our Creator. We find ourselves serving things that interfere with our desire to serve God. God warned the Israelites about putting a king in charge back when they asked for a king. 1 Samuel 8, 7 through 17 says, "And the Lord told him, listen to all that the people are saying to you. It's not you they've rejected. They've rejected me as their king, as they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt until this day. Forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are doing to you. Now listen to them, but warn them solemnly and let them know what the king who will reign over them will do." Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, "This is what the king who will reign over you will do. He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses, and they'll run in front of his chariots. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands, commanders of 50s, others to plow his ground, reap his harvests, others to make weapons of war, equipment for his chariots. And he'll take your daughters to be the perfumers, cooks, bakers. He'll take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his attendants. He will take 1/10 of your grain, your vintage, and give it to his officials and attendants, your men servants and maidservants. The best of your cattle and donkeys he will take for his own use. He'll take 1/10 of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his slaves." We just witnessed an unbelievable election process. The same political party of Franklin Roosevelt has figured out a way to completely take over America. They had help. A large portion of the populace voted for this future. Yes, there's little doubt elections were altered in at least 6 states, shifting the Electoral College in the Democrat favor. See, I'm not talking about changing votes in the machines. The state constitutional processes were altered without following the state constitutions. And without them being followed, voter safeguards were lost. This hasn't been disputed. We've all witnessed the onslaught of changes to the American culture since the inauguration. It's been staggering, the speed with which things are changing. If you like government control, it's great. If you prefer freedom, we're in real trouble. For me, aside from the immoral values of the Democrat platform, the different set of rules is problematic. Just last week, we saw the big fight over GameStop. Everybody knows, probably saw them in the news. You see, there were some hedge fund folks who tried to short sell GameStop and make a lot of money. They were betting GameStop would lose money instead of making money. Well, some of the quote-unquote common people found out about it, decided to take on the hedge funders and started buying the stock. And this caused the price of GameStop to soar instead of going down. This caused a big panic among the so-called elites, the hedge funders, they would need billions of dollars in cash to survive the price going up instead of going down. Because when you short sell a stock, you have to have cash in hand. You've got to put that money up to be able to short it. Their plan to drop the price had been thwarted by the little people. Then, out of nowhere, all of a sudden, the rules changed. Midstream. You had all these lowly people, as they like to call them, making a fortune as GameStop's price went up. And all of a sudden, the rules changed. The ability to buy that stock stopped overnight, just like the voting count stopped, actually. You could sell your stock, but you couldn't buy it. The GameStop stock. Because of this, the price of GameStop started to fall instead of rising, and it saved the hedge fund folks, and the little guys stopped making money in the process. Once more, the elite were saved at the cost of the little guys. And I'm not trying to be, I don't know, class envy or corporate hating or anything like that, but what's fair for them should be fair for you and me. You see, Donald Trump was a tremendous president. Yeah, his rhetoric needed a lot of help, but his policies brought freedom and fairness back to common people like you and me. That's his legacy. No, he didn't incite violence on January 6th like everyone tries to say he did. I listened to the speech, and I know if any one of you listened to the speech, you clearly heard him call for a peaceful and patriotic march to the Capitol. He never called for violence, never incited it. When the violence came, he even told people to go home, to quit. See, the Constitution actually allows and encourages checks and balances in the electoral process. People have been disputing electoral college choices since the beginning. The people wanting to voice their objections were completely in order. Just in 2016, the Democrats pretty much did the same thing. When the Congress met to certify the vote, the Democrats tried every way they could to stop the certification of certain states. Ted Cruz and other senators were doing nothing different than they were. Even the FBI is now saying the attack on the Capitol was pre-planned, not because of the speech. So you see, the House of Representatives impeached Trump a second time over a lie, an attempt to just change, just trying to change everything. When they take away the voice of the little guy and make different rules for the elite, you have problems. How many times have you and I looked over especially the last year, but maybe even longer than that, and seen Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, get away with crimes that a normal person would go to jail for? With the Trump-Russia collusion scandal, the guy that admitted to altering the Pfizer report that went to the FISA court, he got 12 months of probation. He's not in jail. He lied and caused billions of dollars of taxpayer money to be spent trying to prove that Donald Trump colluded with Russia. It was all a lie. And yet, he's not even going to prison for it. It's a mess. See, the people of Egypt became slaves to the government over food. America is becoming the slave of government over fear. COVID-19 has shaken America to its core. The current Democrat Party took advantage of that change. Big time. I personally don't believe, I know this is pessimistic, but I don't believe any election in the future will change the direction America is heading in. I think America's finished as a free, representative democracy. If the Democrats find a way to make Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico states with voting rights, they'll ensure the Democrat senators take over the Senate for the foreseeable future. I think we witnessed that the Supreme Court has already demonstrated that they don't represent the Constitution anymore. They follow their own fears, their own desires, without regard to what the Constitution actually says. Basically, we're in a world of hurt. Policies will change biblical values. Before long, we'll no longer have the safety to serve God and live within godly values. It all seems very bleak. So what's the answer? I remember after the election day when all the votes were stopped and the recounting had started, and all of a sudden Joe Biden started getting more and more votes. They were shifting away from Trump to Biden. And we were all concerned that we're Republicans or conservative, Trumpists, whatever you want to call it. And I received a message from God. It was so powerful when it hit me that I nearly fell to my knees. I'll never forget it. He simply said, "Trust me." Every time I would get down about the more votes that were found for Biden and the more that were taken away from Trump, and get discouraged, that little voice would forcefully come again. Trust me. You see, I grew up in a relatively free America. My children don't understand the freedoms that I experienced, and it's sad, but it's true. I remember there not being a law requiring seatbelts to be worn in cars. Yep. I remember praying in school, saying the Pledge of Allegiance every morning. We'd all gather out at the front of the flag and we'd say the Pledge of Allegiance. I remember when small businesses could thrive without the regulations, raising the cost of running that business so much that it became impossible to survive. I remember when freedom of speech was real, when you weren't afraid to send a text that somebody might see and it would all just go crazy. The time before social media came along and really started dictating speech. For me, the fear of what was coming was so overwhelming, I didn't know where to turn. Freedom was dying. Couldn't be saved. At least that's what I thought. But see, God told me to trust Him. In myself, I misinterpreted that message. I, like millions of Americans, thought truth would win out, Trump would be inaugurated, Biden would lose. And I was confused and somewhat disillusioned for some time the way it all went down. I'm sure many of you felt the same way. You see, the Trump years brought so much good. I could not comprehend going back to the old ways. I believed God was taking America back to righteousness and justice under the Trump years. Why would all that be gone in a blink of an eye through deception and lies? But you see, when God told me to trust me, trust Him, He wasn't telling me Trump would win. He was telling me that the future was going to be unimaginable, and I had to trust him because only he could be my hope. It was so strong of a voice because he knew what was coming. I don't know what will happen over the next 4 years. I do know this. I consider it a privilege to trust God. God has always been there for my family. My parents lived a life of true faith, and they taught that to me. My immediate family, my wife, my kids, we experience God daily. His blessings, His miracles, and His protection never cease. You see, we love and trust Him. We recognize we can't survive without God, and that's what God wants from His children. He wants us to believe Him, wants us to trust Him, and allow Him to direct our path. It's really not complicated. Deuteronomy 10:12-13 says, "And now, O Israel, what does the Lord your God ask of you but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all His ways and love Him and serve the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and observe the Lord's commands and decrees that I'm giving you today for your own good." God is continuing to divide the wheat from the chaff. Ultimately, justice will prevail. I know my Redeemer lives. He holds me in His hands. Nothing in this life can take that away. The same goes for all of you. If we will but look to Him for our strength, trust Him. What greater gift can we give back to God than to allow Him to shine in complete darkness? Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5-7. Many of you know it, most of us know it. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your path straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord. Shun evil. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 9 and 10. Honor the Lord with your wealth, the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. We don't understand why America's changing. Yes, the easy answer is sin has consumed our nation to the point where we no longer have His protection. I don't disagree with this notion. There's an all-consuming sinfulness. It's staggering when you look at it. And with the Democrats who are more and more increasingly becoming socialist in the open, wide open, they don't have a problem letting everybody know they're socialist. With them in power, it'll only get worse. But you see, there's more than 10 good remaining in America. And I'm referring to, the story of Abraham and Lot, when God came to Abraham and told him that they were going to go down and see if the sinfulness of the cities on the plain, Sodom and Gomorrah, was really as bad as they had heard. And if it was, they were going to destroy it. And Abraham negotiated with God, starting with 50. Lord, if there's only 50 good people there, will you destroy the whole city for 50? And God said no. And they worked it down to 10. In Genesis chapter 18, verse 32. Then he said, Abraham was talking, "May the Lord not be angry, but let me speak just once more. What if only 10 can be found?" And The Lord answered, for the sake of 10, I won't destroy it. All there had to be was 10 people, and God would have spared them destruction. Now that's long-suffering. Unfortunately, there weren't 10. And God annihilated the cities on the plain. And yes, and I know this is going to make some people cringe, but yes, homosexuality was a big sin among those in the cities on the plain. We don't hear that enough. No, we don't hate homosexuals, we hate the sin. I have no doubt that was only a small part of the societal promiscuity. It would take major abominations for God's long suffering to finally come to an end. I personally don't know that we've reached that point in America. Maybe we have, I don't know. Either way, I know who I believe, and I am persuaded he is able to keep me and my family in his hands. Do you trust God? Let me remind you of Joshua chapter 24, verse 15. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your forefathers served beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord.